What are you drawing? Grandmother Catherine asked me with a smile as I was absorbed in drawing, using my favorite red-colored pencil. The birthday cake that I had with you. I proudly showed her the drawing, having just finished coloring the bright red strawberries. The picture showed a big, splendid cake surrounded by my grandmother and friends. And a big, beaming smile on my face. Grandmother's eyes crinkled as she smiled warmly. Vicky, you're really good at drawing. Just like an artist. The warmth of her hand as she patted my head felt comforting, and I closed my eyes in bliss. I love my grandmother. Even if my parents don't love me, I can live with her kind hands. My name is Victoria. I'm 28 years old, and I love drawing and reading. During the day, I work as an office clerk at a small company, and at night, I draw comics and keep a diary which I post on my blog and social media. I tend to exaggerate the events of my daily life, but I always try to end on a positive note. Doing so helps me stay positive in real life too. I enjoy seeing people relate to my thoughts and stories. The reason I consciously try to stay positive is because of the environment I grew up in. I remember a story about a famous writer being approached by a beautiful actress. She said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a baby with your brains and my looks? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a baby with your brains and my looks?" The writer replied, "But what if the child inherits your brains and my looks?" The child the actress hoped for was my sister. The one the writer warned about was me. My father works for one of the most famous companies in America. My mother was a beauty queen who won numerous contests. I inherited my father's looks and my mother's intelligence, along with all their insecurities. Relatives often said I had my father's nose or that my mother wasn't good at studying either. This seemed to annoy my parents even more, and they started treating me harshly as the child who wasn't supposed to be. On the other hand, my sister Margaret, who is 3 years younger than me, was known for being adorable and smart in our neighborhood. She had big, bright eyes, a high nose, fair skin, and silky hair. And she was good at charming adults with her sweet demeanor, making everyone adore her like an angel. Of course, our parents doted on Margaret, their ideal daughter, more than anything. Moreover, Margaret knew how to turn me into the villain and draw our parents' love towards her even more. If she broke a dish, she'd say, "Victoria dropped it." Or if she slacked off from her lessons, she'd say, "Victoria didn't let me go." If she took money from Mom's purse, she'd say, "Victoria ordered me to." She blamed everything she did on me. Even though it was obvious she was lying, our parents always blamed and punished me. They believed that I, the defective child, was jealous of perfect Margaret and bullied her. Home was nothing short of hell. Yet, I managed to survive because of kind friends and my paternal grandmother. Especially my grandmother, who lived nearby, always took me in whenever I was kicked out as punishment. She often scolded my parents, but my mother would scream hysterically, insulting grandmother. "Grandma, I'm fine. It's my fault." I would intervene between them. My parents would look smug, and grandmother would look sad. She stopped scolding my parents and instead pampered me. When my grandmother was folding the laundry, I would sit beside her, drawing pictures on the back of flyers. "Vicky, you have a real talent for drawing." She would praise me, and buy me drawing paper and a set of 36 colored pencils. For my birthday, when no one else would even say happy birthday, my grandmother would prepare a large cake for me. "We can't possibly finish this cake with just the two of us." We would laugh heartily and invite my friends over. Eating hamburgers and a cake full of cream at my grandmother's house, opening the gifts my friends brought, I will never forget that happiness. My parents knew I was always at my grandmother's house. At first, they would frown and say a child spoiled by their grandmother would never amount to anything, but by the time I became a fifth grader, they had stopped saying anything at all. They were so focused on raising Margaret to be the perfect daughter that they completely lost interest in me. They stopped being strict and began treating me like I was invisible. As if I never existed in the first place, they provided the bare minimum of food, clothing, and shelter, but that was it. By the time I became a middle schooler, I understood there was no way my parents would ever pay attention to me. I still couldn't completely give up hope, but they said, "Margaret is taking an entrance exam for a private middle school, so we can't afford your tuition." And I finally gave up on being loved by my parents. It wasn't possible that my father, who worked for a large company, couldn't afford my tuition. When my grandmother heard this, she was so angry it seemed like her blood vessels might burst, and she offered, "I'll pay for your tuition, so come live with me and go to high school from my house." I felt too guilty to accept, but seeing my grandmother cry, "Poor Vicky, poor Vicky," I clung to her, crying as well. After that, with the help of my homeroom teacher, I was able to attend an evening high school. I moved out of my parents' house and lived with my grandmother, working a part-time job during the day and going to high school in the evening. My grandmother told me I didn't need a part-time job, but I wanted to at least pay for my living expenses. After graduating from high school, I moved out of my grandmother's house and started working as a clerk in a small company in the neighboring town, and that's where I am now. I told my parents where I lived, but they never visited or sent letters. But I finally gained independence and got away from that house. I was only looking forward. One day, I received mail from Margaret for the first time. It was a wedding invitation in a fancy envelope. Margaret, whom I had barely seen since middle school, was now 25 years old. With her beautiful face like our mother's, she had probably caught a high-income man like our father. The thought of meeting that family made my stomach hurt, but still, I was Margaret's only sister. If I didn't go, it might raise suspicion with her fiancé. I've been a working adult for 10 years now. I'm not the wonderful daughter my parents wanted, but if I could show them that I'm living properly, maybe our relationship would change a little. When I lightly mentioned on my blog, "I'm going to attend my sister's wedding after being estranged for over 10 years, I received warm words from my followers. I decided to muster the courage to attend the wedding. It's Margaret's wedding day. As the bride's sister, I can't be late, so I drive to the venue a bit early. The venue was characterized by a charming building that resembled a castle, making it look like something out of a fairy tale. I was led by the staff to the family waiting room. Inside, I found my parents, who had aged more in the past 10 years, and the beautiful Margaret already dressed in her wedding gown. Margaret. A surge of sadness and nostalgia welled up inside me, making it hard to even say hello, but they looked at each other and said, "See, Mom, I told you. Victoria would definitely come." What? I froze at Margaret's words. Mom exaggeratedly shrugged her shoulders. "Well, I didn't think someone as shameless as you would come to Margaret's wedding." What? What? Really, you're still as dumb as ever. Dad scratched his thinning hair and looked at me with an exasperated expression. Even if I was considered a nuisance to the family, this blatant attitude was too much. I came to Margaret's wedding just to fulfill my duty as a sister, and here I was being treated like an unwelcome guest. "Margaret, you sent me an invitation, didn't you?" I asked hesitantly, and Margaret gave me an awkward smile. "Well, yeah. It would look bad not to invite my blood sister, even for someone as useless as you." Her words were as harsh as ever, but I didn't have the energy to care at this point. "Then why treat me like a nuisance? Didn't you want me to come?" When I pointed out the contradiction, Margaret placed a hand on her cheek and tilted her head. Well, I did, but then I realized it's better for appearances to say you're dead rather than have everyone laugh at you. What? I realized that about a month ago. I meant to tell you, but then today just came around. What's that supposed to mean? You made up that I was dead and didn't bother to tell me because it was too much trouble? As I stared at Margaret in disbelief, Mom glared at me. You can't help it. You've never been married or had anyone to marry, so you wouldn't understand, but the time before a wedding is really busy. And I didn't think you'd actually come, so I told Margaret, even if you contact her, she won't come. Because if I were in your position, I wouldn't want to attend a wedding. It's too embarrassing, right? Mom twisted her face into a mocking smile. Don't be so mean to her, Mom. I knew Victoria would come. She thought she'd finally be recognized as part of the family, right? That she was loved and needed, right? Isn't that so? What? Sorry to get your hopes up. Instead, I've told everyone that you're the kind sister who died young from a brain illness. Margaret looked down at me with pity. No one's going to believe such a sudden lie, especially not your relatives or your husband. Don't worry, Victoria. You haven't seen any of the relatives for a long time, have you? Everyone knows that you've always been the black sheep of our family. We'll just tell them the funeral was a small family affair because you didn't want it to interfere with my wedding. No one will question it. I've already told my husband, and he believed me easily because he's so infatuated with me. What? It's true that I haven't properly met with any relatives except my grandmother since I graduated from middle school. Some relatives were concerned about me, but that was more than 10 years ago. If they heard that I had died without any contact, they might actually believe it. As I stood there in a daze, my father threw something at me. It was the seating chart for the wedding. Look at this. Margaret is marrying into a family of doctors. There's no way I can introduce someone as incompetent and foolish as you to them. I silently opened it, and sure enough, on the groom's side, there were several people with the title of doctor, starting with the groom himself. Take it as a souvenir and get out of here. You're already dead to us. Ha 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 ha. My father's thoroughly disgusted voice, combined with Margaret and my mother's high-pitched laughter, echoed in my mind. Holding my dizzy head, I fled from the venue. I jumped into my car and tried to start the engine with trembling hands. My hands wouldn't cooperate, and tears streamed down my face. I felt a mix of sadness, frustration, and hatred. It was like a palette filled with only dark colors, being violently mixed together with a thick brush, an overwhelming feeling of helplessness. I should have known those people would never change. Yet, somewhere deep down, I had hoped they might, and that made me feel ashamed and frustrated, making the tears flow even more. I watched absent-mindedly through the glass as people continued to enter the venue. I didn't belong here, but my body felt too heavy to move. Suddenly, my purse vibrated with a smartphone notification. With cold hands, I took it out and saw a notification about a comment on social media. I had posted yesterday about attending the estranged sister's wedding, and it seemed friends and followers were worried and sending messages of support. The warm words from them made my heart ache. Moved by their kindness, I used a feature I had never used before to vent my frustration for the first time. My own parents and sister have declared me dead. It seems like I have no value in living. As I typed, the tears wouldn't stop. Soon, messages started pouring in. Message after message. Victoria, you are not worthless. I love your illustrated journals and your warm personality. Your illustrated journals have saved me before. If that's the kind of family they are, you should cut them off, Victoria. All of them were words of sadness and anger for my sake, from people who didn't even know my face. The words slowly seeped into my heart, which had completely lost confidence. Then, a close friend who must have seen my Instagram called me, crying, "Victoria, wake up. There's no way they can keep up such a lie forever. Stand tall for your grandmother who cherishes you." Those words woke me up. My grandmother, who cried, got angry, and laughed for my sake. She must be at the wedding venue too. How sad would she be if she heard that I had died? Imagining that made my anger surge. I am not a worthless person. I am not someone to be ashamed of for living. The ones who should be ashamed are those who look down on people who live earnestly on their own 2 feet. I took out a handkerchief from my bag and wiped my eyes. Then, after reapplying my eyeliner, I slowly opened the car door. By the time I returned to the venue, the reception had already begun. I peeked inside through the glass wall. It seemed like it was time for the slideshow of the bride and groom's childhoods. The slideshow included family photos, some of which featured me as well. As it ended, the MC shared that the bride's sister had passed away from illness a few months prior. Naturally, the relatives at the bride's family table began to stir, looking at my parents. Then, my father stood up. "Margaret's sister fell ill with a brain disease and passed away quickly. She was a kind child, close to Margaret, and worried that her illness would delay Margaret's wedding." He began to speak. My mother, sitting beside him, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. I marveled at how they could lie so boldly, having just seen me earlier. "My daughter in heaven must be happy now." My father continued, tears streaming down his face as the guests watched in shock. Do you need something from this venue?" Seeing me glaring at the glass, a staff member nervously approached and asked. "Oh, sorry. Actually, my sister asked me to surprise her." "Sister? You mean?" "Yes, the bride," I said, smiling, and then I pushed the door open with all my might. It was the door behind the bride's family table, and everyone's eyes shifted from the father of the bride to me. For a moment, the sheer number of eyes on me made me falter, but I remembered my friend's words and stood firm. My parents continued their fabricated memories about me without noticing. Only Margaret noticed me, standing up abruptly. Before she could shout anything, I raised my voice to the loudest it had ever been in my life. "I am Victoria, the bride's sister. I took a bit longer to come back to life, sorry for being late. Hell is a hot place, you know, I got a bit sweaty." My heartfelt greeting silenced the entire room. "Oh, sorry. I went to heaven, not hell. I died of a brain disease, or something." I tilted my head and smiled, though my heart was pounding. As everyone stared in shock at the strange sight, Margaret was the first to regain her composure. "Who are you?" "My beloved sister is no longer in this world. How dare you make such a horrible joke? Someone, get that woman out." Margaret screamed. She probably intended to have me removed before causing a scene. However, a voice called out near me almost immediately. "Vicky!" My grandmother stood up and staggered towards me. "Vicky, is that you? Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. I couldn't believe you were gone." Grandma grasped my dress with trembling hands. I held her hand tightly. "Grandma, it's Victoria. It's your Victoria who loves you so much." As she was about to collapse, I hurriedly supported her with both hands. My father's sister, Hillary, who usually took care of my grandmother, rushed over. "Vicky, you're really okay, right? You're not sick, right?" Worriedly asking while supporting Grandma, Hillary looked at me, and I nodded slightly. I entrusted Grandma to Hillary and once again looked around the venue. The groom's side was in an uproar, and the groom himself was in shock. The bride's side was also in turmoil, but Margaret and our parents' faces were pale. I adjusted my dress, forcing myself to stand tall and speak loudly. First of all, I sincerely apologize for causing a commotion at this celebration. Allow me to introduce myself again. I am Victoria, the bride's sister. I was supposed to attend today, but Margaret and our parents told me to leave, saying they would pretend I had suddenly died. The entire hall became even more agitated. I hope you can understand the heart of a granddaughter who didn't want to shock her grandmother, who has always cherished her, even with a lie. Vicky, my grandmother whispered in a hoarse voice. The reason my parents and Margaret wanted to erase me is because I am an inadequate daughter. Since I was young, they have discriminated against me and favored Margaret because I am neither talented nor intelligent. Hey! My father shouted in a panic at my revelation. But I ignored him and continued speaking. Whether influenced by our parents or due to her nature, Margaret always made me the villain to monopolize our parents' love. Even if Margaret broke a dish or stole money from their wallet, it was always blamed on me. I never did that! Margaret interrupted me. As all eyes turned to her, she began to tremble and shed tears. Everyone. I am ashamed to admit it, but my sister is a compulsive liar. That's why we hesitated to invite her to the wedding and decided to pretend she had died. I apologize for lying. Margaret! The groom, Matthew, looked puzzled but stood by Margaret. The guests, unsure of what to believe, seemed confused. It was my grandmother who changed the atmosphere in the hall. Shame on you! Her low, dignified voice echoed to the far corners of the hall. You have always bullied Vicky like this. Do you have no heart? Grandma, but... Stop making excuses, it's disgraceful. Don't add to your shame any further. Margaret faltered under my grandmother's stern words. I'm leaving. I didn't even want to attend this wedding, but I thought Vicky would be here, so I came. If this is what the wedding is like, I wouldn't have come at all. Let's go, Vicky. My grandmother's wrinkled hand gripped mine. I had much more to say, but the warmth of her hand made it all seem irrelevant. Yeah, let's go. As we were leaving the hall, Margaret's grandmother is a bit senile. I heard my mother's pathetic excuse. I quickly closed the door so my grandmother wouldn't hear. Vicky, come to my house tonight. I'll make your favorite sweet potatoes. My grandmother gently suggested, caressing my hand like she was talking to a small child. Yeah. I clung to her and cried like a little child. Soon after, all of my father's relatives left the hall too. They were disgusted by the inhumane lies of Margaret and my parents and lost the will to celebrate. I'm sorry, Victoria. I knew Nicholas was hard on you, but it was hard to criticize another family. I wish I had been more supportive. I patted Hillary's back as she tearfully apologized. As an adult, I now understand how hard it is to speak up about issues in someone else's family. In the end, I left the venue with my father's relatives. I hadn't said everything I wanted to my parents, but I was proud of myself for not running away and taking a step forward. Later, while I was leisurely enjoying sweet potatoes at my grandmother's house, the wedding venue reportedly became chaotic. Margaret and my parents desperately tried to convince the groom's side that I was the worst, most unmanageable person and that my grandmother's judgment was failing. But with many of the groom's relatives leaving, it seemed like no one believed Margaret or her parents' excuses anymore. In fact, the more they tried to explain themselves, the worse they looked, and guests started leaving one by one. Meanwhile, the groom remained in shock, but his parents went around apologizing to the remaining guests and encouraging them to go home. Then, to an enraged Margaret and our parents, who were turning red and blue with anger, the groom's father said, "We will hear the full story later, but depending on your answers, we may need to consult the appropriate authorities." And with that, they left. As the venue emptied, the staff looking on from a distance, Margaret and her parents didn't reflect on their mistakes. Instead, they blamed me, the one who couldn't read the room, and stormed out of the venue, heading to my apartment in the neighboring town. However, I was at my grandmother's house, having enjoyed some sweet potatoes and taking a shower, so I wasn't home. Enraged that the door wouldn't open despite ringing the bell multiple times, my father kicked the apartment door repeatedly, and Margaret threw a stone at a window, breaking the glass. The commotion scared my neighbors, who called the police. Margaret and my parents were caught in the act and taken to the police station. When the police called and the landlord told me everything, I was truly shocked. I apologized profusely to the landlord, but she said, "I know you're a good person. This was just an unfortunate situation for you." Explaining the whole ordeal to the police, they sympathized with me and suggested I stay with other relatives for my safety. Later, I met with Matthew and his family to apologize for ruining their wedding. I offered to pay for any damages, but they refused, saying, "You are also a victim in this." Matthew gave a weak smile and said, "Apparently, right after the wedding, they contacted a detective agency to investigate Margaret. And a lot of things came up. Lies that Margaret and our parents had told. First, Margaret had claimed she entered and graduated from a prestigious university. I believe that too. But she had actually dropped out after 2 years. The reason was that she tried to seduce a married professor to get grades, and his wife sued her. She also bragged about working at a big company, but she was only working part-time at a grocery store in the company building. There, she had another affair with a married man and was sued by his wife again. She met Matthew after losing her job. Matthew fell for her at first sight and didn't care much about her education or job history. His parents, too, weren't fixated on him marrying a doctor as long as he was happy with his choice. But with all the lies exposed, they decided to call off the wedding and demanded she never contact them again instead of asking for damages. Margaret and her parents were left with debts from 2 previous lawsuits, the wedding, honeymoon, and new home expenses. And they had to pay for the repairs to my apartment. Facing nearly $100,000 in expenses, they tried asking their relatives for help, but all the father's side relatives refused. The mother's side also said they couldn't lend such a large sum to liars. My parents and Margaret kept blaming me. "You ungrateful wretch! That's why you're such a failure. Take responsibility for ruining my life." I no longer fear their ranting and raving. The little girl who cried for their love and begged to be part of their family was nowhere to be found. "I'll sue you. If you don't like it, then you take responsibility and pay up." My father, veins bulging on his forehead and spitting as he shouted, was met with my calm question. "How? Huh? How exactly do you plan to sue me?" "Well," my father stammered, glancing at my mother and Margaret. My mother and Margaret opened their mouths as if to say something, but nothing came out. "How do you plan to sue me after neglecting me as a child and treating me like I was dead when I grew up? Should I sue you instead? Are you trying to increase the compensation?" The 3 of them faltered, looking bitter and frustrated. I'm not sure if I can actually sue them, but it would be a deterrent. The fact that their proud daughter had her engagement broken off due to a terrible lie, and that the whole family ended up dealing with the police, had become a topic of conversation among my father's colleagues. If they messed up any further, my father's position at work would be at risk. The people who once haunted my dreams, making me wake up in a cold sweat, now appeared foolish and pathetic, small and insignificant. In the end, they gave up on squeezing money out of me and used most of their retirement savings to pay off their debts. Margaret, their once proud daughter, had become a complete problem. My parents, who had adored Margaret, now struggled to deal with her, and Margaret, whose world had crumbled around her, became hysterical and lashed out at everyone. If they could acknowledge their sins and reform, they might still be able to start over, but I doubted they could become humble people. Amidst all this, I resigned from my job, took my grandmother, and moved to a small rural town. There, I got a job as a clerk at a small company and started a slow life with my grandmother, who rented a plot of land for farming. As I shared our daily life in a picture diary on my blog and social media, my following gradually grew. People said they were healed by the heartwarming episodes with my grandmother, and before I knew it, I had tens of thousands of followers. I even received offers to publish a book, and I felt as if I were living in a dream, elated by this unexpected turn of events.
I knew it, Vicky. Your drawings are kind and make everyone happy.
My grandmother, a little smaller now with a bent back, stroked my head with the same warm hand as before. My life had finally been recognized by the world. But what made me happier was my grandmother's smile. I felt from the bottom of my heart that I was glad to be alive.
I'm sorry to tell you, but... What?
I gasped as I heard the reality from the police. My body recoiled, refusing to accept the facts I had just heard. I couldn't believe my brother-in-law, Dawson, and my precious daughter, Eliza, had tried to commit suicide using charcoal briquettes. Dawson, who was kind to a fault, and Eliza, who was so easygoing. And then there was me. We may have been an unconventional family, but I thought we were a normal one.
It's my fault. If only I had been stronger.
Frustrated with my weak body and timid nature, I blamed myself. I must have been the one who drove Eliza to desperation. But why would Dawson attempt suicide with Eliza? There could only be one reason. That nasty woman must have been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Their daily interactions made it clear. Dawson had always been at that woman's beck and call. Before talking everything to the police, I needed to confront that woman myself and make her confess. Fueled by an unprecedented level of anger, I began preparing for revenge. My name is Nora, and I'm 45 years old. My misfortune began 3 years ago. My beloved husband, Ronald, passed away from a stroke. At the time, our daughter Eliza had just turned 14. I remember how we held each other and cried all night after the funeral. What are we going to do now? Mom, do you think we can survive? It's going to be okay. I'll figure something out, I promise. We had relied entirely on my husband for our livelihood. I had always been physically weak, making it difficult for me to work like others. It was only natural for Eliza to feel anxious. Honestly, I was just as worried. I had only worked part-time jobs during my student days and had hardly any real work experience. I wondered if I could support her and myself going forward. One day, as I was feeling disheartened, I received a phone call from someone.
Hi, Nora. It's Dawson. I was wondering how you were doing.
Oh, hi Dawson. It's been a while. The call was from my brother-in-law, Dawson. Having just lost his brother, I'm sure his wounds were deep too. Even so, he had reached out to check on us, worried about what we were going through. That weekend, Dawson visited our home and made an unexpected proposal.
Why don't the three of us live together from now on? It would make things easier for you.
What? Are you sure?
Of course. I think Ronald would be worried about you and Eliza from heaven. It would be tough for you to send Eliza to college on just your income alone, right? Dawson.
Nothing could have been more reassuring. Eliza and I accepted Dawson's proposal and decided to live together. Dawson worked at an advertising agency, and while he didn't earn as much as my husband had at a trading company, he still made a decent living. I planned to work part-time as well, so our lives were bound to become much more comfortable. Just as I had thought, once we began living together, our lives became far more manageable.
This is great. I can be a bit of a slob, I'll admit, but with you and Eliza handling the housework, I can focus more on my job.
I was worried about getting by on just my income, so this is a huge help.
Thank you, Dawson. I'll do my best with both my studies and helping out around the house. Yeah. Let's work together, the three of us.
However, the pleasant living arrangement was short-lived. As Dawson grew accustomed to having Eliza and me around, he gradually began to reveal his true nature. He was a violent drunk, loved gambling, and often stayed out late on weekends. On top of that, he was a real womanizer with wandering hands. He would sometimes grope Eliza's and my behinds as we passed by.
Hey! Cut it out! You're drunk again, aren't you?
Don't be such a prude. Eliza lets me touch her without complaining.
Stop putting your hands on her.
Eliza started avoiding Dawson. She said she hated having him touch her body. She's a quiet girl and understands the debt we owe him. If he were to press her hard, she'd probably have a tough time refusing. I couldn't help but think I had made a terrible mistake. At some point, Dawson's demeanor began to change. He became much more violent and aggressive than before. I remember him mumbling to himself, looking frightened.
Damn it. This wasn't supposed to happen. It's all that woman's fault.
I had no idea who that woman he was referring to could be. I knew nothing about his social life, and I had no way of finding out. Then one day, I made a startling discovery on the side of Dawson's head.
Dawson, your head. Huh? Oh. What the? Damn it. Why is this happening? Son of a bitch.
There was a circular bald spot on his head. He must have been under an incredible amount of stress. I couldn't help but feel terrified. I imagined Dawson taking out that stress on Eliza and me. Pushed to the brink of developing stress-induced alopecia, he eventually quit his job. When I asked if he had found a new one, he said he had quit without having anything else lined up.
What choice did I have? Do you want me to go even balder? I'm not blaming you. I don't think you'll have any trouble finding a new job. Please, just don't get angry.
But he didn't start job hunting right away. He said he had no intention of working until his alopecia was completely healed. Around that time, his attitude became much rougher than before. On top of that, he became far more slovenly, repeatedly exasperating Eliza and me.
Come on. Please don't walk around naked after getting out of the bath. What did you say? This is my house too. I can dress however I want. But it's really troubling. Eliza's at a delicate age, so please be considerate. Why do I have to put up with so much?
Dawson became short-tempered. And every time he drank at home, he would mutter curses at that woman.
It's that woman's fault. It's not my fault. That woman set me up.
He kept repeating that. I thought the woman pushing Dawson to the edge must be a female coworker. But maybe that wasn't the case. After all, he was still suffering even after quitting his job. Who on earth could that woman be? Dawson wouldn't tell me when I asked. Then one day, when I came home from work, I saw an unfamiliar pair of women's shoes by the front door. The aroma of a seemingly delicious meal wafted from inside. Eliza should still be at school, so why? As I entered the kitchen dining area, I found a slender woman standing there, cooking. Dawson was sitting quietly at the table. His eyes were darting around as he looked at me. The woman spoke up before he could.
You must be Nora? Nice to meet you. I'm Beverly, your new next-door neighbor.
Oh, nice to meet you too. But why are you cooking?
Dawson said he was hungry, so I borrowed your kitchen. I used to work with him at his previous job. I hope we can get along well from now on.
Yes, of course. The pleasure is all mine. Beverly said she would leave the cooking to me and go home. Of course, I didn't mind, but what surprised me was Beverly's behavior after that. Beverly wrapped her arm around Dawson's neck and whispered something to him, her lips almost touching his earlobe. Dawson's reaction was to turn deathly pale and start trembling all over.
Dawson! What's wrong? Dawson! He was harassed at his previous workplace. Poor thing. I'm sure that must have brought back memories for him. Take good care of him, okay?
Well then, see you around. And with that, Nora left. As she walked out, Dawson let out an enormously deep sigh. He must have been incredibly tense. That woman tormenting him had to be her. But he was so terrified that no matter what I asked, he wouldn't divulge any details. He seemed completely dominated by fear. For the sake of our future, I thought it might be best to do something about it. With that in mind, I started racking my brain for ideas. A few months had passed since Beverly moved in next door. During this time, he had been disturbingly docile. You could say he was constantly distracted, his mind elsewhere. He often didn't notice when I spoke to him, and he still made no effort to find a new job. I think I was so preoccupied with Dawson that I failed to notice a change in my precious only daughter. One day, Eliza uncharacteristically complained to me about feeling unwell. I feel kind of feverish. I might have caught a cold. Oh, really? Maybe you should stay home from school. It wasn't the season for colds to be going around, so what could it be? A thought suddenly occurred to me, and I checked Eliza's body, feeling puzzled. The symptoms Eliza was describing were the same as when I had first become pregnant with her. An unpleasant notion raced through my mind. I considered the possibility that Dawson had made a move on Eliza. Our Eliza is timid. It would be understandable if she couldn't refuse him. Hey, forgive me if I'm mistaken, but Eliza, did you by any chance do that kind of thing with someone? Could there be a baby in your belly?
Oh! That's...
Eliza. What? Really? Tell me. Who was it? I won't get mad. Eliza closed her mouth, on the verge of tears. She clearly didn't want to say. I asked her this and that, but to no avail. In any case, it seemed certain that she had engaged in that kind of act with someone. I took the still silent Eliza to the gynecologist. The test results confirmed that Eliza was indeed pregnant. No matter how many times I asked who the father was, Eliza wouldn't answer. Her head was bowed, her lips sealed. She must have had a strong reason for not wanting to tell me, or for being unable to. In other words, the other party wasn't someone ordinary. This wasn't a happy pregnancy. The thought of my Eliza going through something like this. It pained me as if it were happening to me. A few days later, in the evening, I received a call on my cell phone as I was coming home from work. The call persistently came from an unknown number, so I tentatively answered it and found that it was the police. They told me to come to the police station in the city immediately, so I hailed a taxi and went straight there. Apparently, Dawson had attempted suicide together with Eliza.
What? Where are they now? Are they safe? Please tell me.
Please calm down. They're both in the hospital now. It seemed that Dawson and Eliza had tried to kill themselves using charcoal briquettes. However, the car they used wasn't sealed properly, and they were in a convenience store parking lot. Moreover, it was still light out, so someone noticed something was wrong and quickly came to their aid.
So their lives aren't in danger, then?
Well, yes, but I'm afraid to say that this incident doesn't appear to be a simple suicide attempt. There are signs that Eliza was assaulted by a group.
What?
My body recoiled, refusing to accept the facts I had just heard. Assaulted by a group. How could this happen to her? Was Dawson involved? But why would he attempt suicide? Could it be that he was tormented by a guilty conscience? How was Dawson involved in the assault? I couldn't shake the nausea. How did things end up like this? It's my fault. If only I had been stronger. Frustrated with my weak body and timid nature, I blamed myself. I must have been the one who drove her to desperation. But why would Dawson attempt suicide with Eliza? There could only be one reason. That woman must have been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Their daily interactions made it clear. Dawson seemed unable to defy that woman. Before talking to the police, I needed to confront that woman myself and make her confess. Fueled by an unprecedented level of anger, I began preparing for revenge. I investigated everything I possibly could about that neighbor, Beverly. Her background, personality, family, relationships, absolutely everything. As a result, I learned that she was now completely alone in the world. She had apparently quit the company she worked for. I also discovered that she had gotten divorced a few years ago. The reason for the divorce was her infidelity. When I asked her former colleagues, they gave me incredibly detailed information. Beverly was a terribly wicked woman. She was a frightening woman who repeatedly found men she could use and sucked them dry to the bone. After taking every precaution I could, I called Beverly out to a cafe during the day. She arrived with a serene smile on her face. Long time no see. Did you wait long? What can I do for you?
Don't play dumb. You're the one who drove Dawson and Eliza to suicide, aren't you?
Suicide? Drove them to it? What are you talking about?
Dawson and Eliza tried to kill themselves with charcoal.
The surprise on Beverly's face was so feigned it made me sick. She knew everything, yet how long did she intend to keep up this act? She had an expression that said she knew nothing and was completely uninvolved. Did she not understand how devastated and angry I was, having nearly lost my precious Eliza?
Stop playing dumb. I know all about it. You were exploiting his weaknesses, weren't you? You were manipulating him, right?
Wait, calm down. I really have no idea what you're talking about.
Is that so? Then shall I jog your memory?
I turned my smartphone screen toward Beverly. The footage shown was from our living room. It was a hidden camera recording, so a potted plant was obstructing the view. However, it was clear who was doing what and where. Beverly had Dawson on all fours, kicking his rear over and over. I couldn't see her expression, but I could tell she was angry.
You ugly piece of trash. Worthless scum. Apologize for being born.
She was shouting those words. Dawson was desperately apologizing. He was crying in a pathetic voice. Just like a child.
I had everything investigated. Dawson borrowed money from you, didn't he? A considerable amount, at that. Isn't that right? Say something.
Even if you say that, I don't know what you're. He and I simply had a relationship where we enjoyed slightly abnormal play. It has nothing to do with you, does it?
Yes, you're right. I'm just his housemate. We weren't married or anything, so I suppose I have no right to interfere with your tastes.
Then, don't complain about it. I cut Beverly off. That's not what I wanted to ask about now. I was trying to confirm how you had cornered him.
Just answer my question. You lent money to Dawson, right? But that money wasn't yours. Isn't that true? What? How do you know that?
I played another video for her to see. I had set up more than one hidden camera. I had been suspicious of Beverly ever since she moved in. I wanted to find out what kind of interactions Dawson and Beverly were having while I was away. That's why I had installed a hidden camera in every room. In the video, Dawson was forced to sit in front of Beverly and was slapped repeatedly. There was no doubt that she was responsible for his alopecia areata. Why was he subjected to this treatment? The reason he couldn't defy Beverly was the existence of the debt.
Look, this scene here. You say, if you don't pay back the money soon, those guys will make you suffer. Those guys are the gangs, right? Huh? Where's the evidence of that? I told you, it's pointless to play dumb. I was worried about Eliza, so I was wary of him too.
I tried to figure out what he was afraid of. So, even though I knew it was wrong, I secretly searched his room. As a result, I found out that Dawson had a large debt. The amount was about $50,000. It was all debt Dawson had incurred from gambling.
You lent money to Dawson, but it wasn't actually your money, it was the gang's money. He unknowingly borrowed it, and then he was put through hell. That's how it is, right?
You talk as if you saw it all.
There's no evidence that I have ties to the gang.
Don't say such scandalous things. I'm terribly offended.
I'm the one who's offended. How long do you intend to feign ignorance?
I played a third video. This location wasn't inside the house. It was from the security camera at the grocery store where I work. The video showed Beverly and another man who was tall and too thin. His name was supposed to be Ariel, and they seemed very close.
This man is Ariel, right? He's with the gang, isn't he? How do you know about that? Obviously, because I investigated. You see, I work stocking shelves at that grocery store. I had noticed that you sometimes shopped there. I also knew that you would come with a man sometimes. I was shocked when I looked into it. He was with a gang.
In other words, Beverly was an underling of the gang. Her role was to trap targeted men. She would approach them, saying she would lend them money if they were in trouble, immobilize them, and then pressure them strongly.
If you can't pay back the money, do as I say.
Dawson had probably started living with us out of pure goodwill at first. However, his demeanor changed partway through. It was because she demanded repayment of the debt. He learned that she had ties to the gang and began living in fear of her shadow. Eventually, he was driven to the point of developing alopecia areata and quit his job as a way to escape from her. Even so, she followed him. Dawson must have been terrified when he found out she had moved in next door.
Dawson, who was up to his ears in gambling debt, had no choice but to listen to you and your gang connections. Isn't that right? Give me an honest answer already.
And if I say it is? So?
You're the worst. And then you people ordered him to hand over Eliza, didn't you?
I wasn't the one who gave the order. It was Ariel. If you want to hold a grudge, hold it against him.
You're just as guilty. Because of you people, Eliza was violated and even got pregnant with some stranger's child. Dawson was so tormented by this that he tried to commit suicide with charcoal along with Eliza. It's all written right here.
Beverly's eyes widened when she saw the paper I pulled out. That's right, he had left me a note in his room. The letter detailed how she had been cornering him. He had written frankly about everything, including the debt and his fear of the gang.
The night I left the two of them in the hospital and returned to the room, I searched his room. And I found this note left on his desk. In the letter, he apologized to me over and over. He was sorry for putting her through this.
Beverly stammered.
Then, it's not my fault that Eliza was passed around by man. I won't accept that you bear no responsibility whatsoever. It's because you drove Dawson into a corner. I will never forgive you. Never.
It was the first time I had ever been this angry at someone. This woman and her gang had wounded my precious Eliza's heart and body. How sad and painful it must have been for her. She must have wanted to talk to me about it. But she couldn't. She didn't want me to worry. Poor thing, truly. Eliza had tried to leave this world as he told her to.
You're the one who drove them to suicide too, aren't you? Answer. Beverly. I don't know. I didn't do anything like that.
What proof do you have?
I do have proof. Here, read the last part of this note. It says, from now on, hand Eliza over as many times as they want. If you don't like it, go apologize to her in the afterlife. That's what it says he was told. Well, you cornered Dawson by saying that, didn't you? Didn't you? Oh, but I never thought they would actually commit suicide.
Beverly finally admitted her involvement. Of course, even if she hadn't admitted it herself, there was evidence. If I examined all the audio from the hidden cameras, I could have verified her statements. But there was meaning in making Beverly confess herself. I took a voice recorder out of my handbag and showed it to her.
I recorded our entire exchange just now. I'm going to submit this to the police. Wait a minute. Isn't that unfair? Recording me. You have no right to criticize anyone. Do you truly understand the gravity of what you've done? Do you feel even the slightest remorse?
At my shout, all the customers in the store turned to look at us. Of course, this situation was going according to my plan too. Surrounded by people, Beverly couldn't escape. When I said I would submit evidence to the police, Beverly's resolve completely crumbled.
I'm sorry. I think I really did a terrible thing. I regret it, and I swear I'll never do it again. I want to sit in front of Eliza's grave and apologize. So please, just don't tell the police. I'll do anything for you from now on. I'm afraid I have no use for a good-for-nothing woman like you. And my Eliza is still alive. She hasn't woken up yet, though. Don't go sending her to the grave without permission, okay?
Thanks to the quick discovery, Dawson is still alive as well. If they regain consciousness, both of them will surely testify. They'll say that Beverly was a gang underling and that she drove them to attempt suicide. She has nowhere left to run now. She seemed to realize this too, and her voice finally broke into sobs. It's Ariel's fault. I'm a victim too. He used me.
Used you? How so?
The same as Dawson. He immobilized me with debt. He threatened to drown my parents in the sea if I didn't do as he said, so I had no choice but to.
More nonsense. Didn't I say I investigated everything? Beverly, I looked into you too. Your parents passed away a long time ago, right? It's a lie that this person threatened you. Isn't it?
Beverly hung her head, her face beat red. She must have been terribly embarrassed about having her lie exposed so easily. She was a woman who lied as easily as she breathed. I braced myself. I mustn't believe this woman's words or tears, as they were surely mixed with lies.
You actively cooperated with Ariel. You're the one who told him about Eliza, aren't you?
That may be true.
I don't remember very well, but that's enough. The police can verify the rest. Right?
At my call, the men in the seats behind us turned around. They were all police officers. All three of them were glaring at Beverly with sharp eyes. She turned pale when they showed her their police badges. She probably never thought I was cooperating with the police.
Ms. Beverly, please come with us to the station. Oh, and don't think about trying to run. If you do, the charges against you might become more severe. What you committed was the crime of inciting suicide. It's not a lie. That crime really exists. Apparently, the statutory penalty for encouraging someone to take their own life is imprisonment. With work or imprisonment without work for not less than 6 months but not more than 7 years.
The officers grabbed the trembling Beverly. She seemed to have finally given up. She hung her head dejectedly. Beverly was taken to the police station, and her crimes were later confirmed. She was also charged for handing a minor over to a gang. In the end, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Both Dawson and Eliza survived, but they could have easily died if things had gone slightly differently. It's only natural that Beverly's crimes, which drove them to that state, would be severe. She apparently answered all of the police's questions honestly. She must have realized that making excuses was pointless. It was pathetic. 5 years later, what kind of life did Beverly lead after being released from prison? I heard about it secondhand from an acquaintance. She moved to a small town in the Boston and started living there alone. Her job was in the sex industry at a pub. She must have been aware that such work suited her. But her rotten true nature hadn't been fixed by her time in prison. She made a move on a male customer. Unfortunately for her, that man happened to be someone important to the owner of the pub. The furious madam banished Beverly, and she could never work at that establishment again. To make matters worse, the owner had connections to the gang organization that controlled the area. Her anger at having her important man touched was intense, and Beverly became a wanted woman. In a small town with nowhere to turn to, Beverly had no way to escape. She was found pretending not to be home in her apartment and taken away. One can imagine what the gang members did to her. She was violated by the men for nearly a week straight and left in tatters. Afterward, she was abandoned even by the gang and wandered the town like a worn-out rag. With no money and no one to turn to, she ended up among the homeless. There, she was repeatedly violated again and is said to still be passed around endlessly. The one who told me this was that gang member named Ariel. Apparently, he secretly provided information to the police in exchange for avoiding prison time. He was pleased that he managed to stay out of jail. And he had come to tell me about Beverly's fate, as she had made me suffer. Honestly, I can't forgive him either. After all, he's one of the group who did terrible things to my precious Eliza. However, the end that Beverly met, which he shared with me, was indeed good news for me. I thanked him and parted ways, telling him never to show his face again. Dawson and Eliza woke up about 3 months after the suicide attempt came to light. On the hospital bed, Dawson apologized to me over and over through tears. "I'm truly sorry. I'm so sorry." He kept apologizing. "Actually, I hated it the whole time. But I was scared. They told me to hand over Eliza, so I had no choice. I'm really sorry." Is Eliza alive? Yes, she's alive. She woke up before you and is receiving treatment in another room now. Fortunately, there were no lingering effects. You two were really lucky. I see. I need to apologize to Eliza too. I did something truly inexcusable. I'm sincerely remorseful. My Eliza was surprisingly strong. It was Eliza who brought up wanting to have an abortion. She said there was no way she could raise a child right now. So, as much as she hated to, she wanted to send the baby back to heaven. I really wish I could raise the child myself, but it can't be helped. That's right. Please, don't blame yourself. You did nothing wrong, Eliza. You're right. I'm okay. And I can't really blame Dawson either. When he handed me over to the Nang, he resisted at the very end. He said, "No, this isn't right. Please, at least spare her." Is that so? He didn't say anything about that. It was because he showed that attitude that she accepted the idea of suicide. He apologized for putting her through such a painful experience. He apparently told her, "Let's go to heaven together so we don't cause trouble for Nora." Idiots. What heaven? No matter what happens to you, you're still my precious Eliza. Don't ever try something stupid like suicide again, you hear me? Yeah. I'm sorry. Mom, you seem to have gotten stronger somehow. Maybe so. It might be because I went through so much pain. I want to be discharged soon and get back to a normal life. After that, I started living with Eliza and Dawson again, the three of us together. Some people might be surprised, wondering how I could live with him after everything. This is probably a feeling that only we who experienced it can understand. The resentment toward him still remains in my heart, but the anger is mostly gone now. He too was a victim, and I felt more pity for him than anything else. Since then, he has completely quit drinking and gambling and is working diligently. We were all tossed about by a terrible fate and suffered, all three of us. But it's because we're those three that I believe we can live on together, supporting each other.